Hello there, my friend. It's been a long while, hasn't it? Find a comfortable chair. Pour yourself something warm. The rain is tapping gently on the window pane today, a soft, percussive rhythm that seems to be counting out the seconds, the minutes, the years. It's the kind of day that encourages stillness, the kind of day that pulls memories from the dusty corners of the mind like old books from a forgotten shelf. I'm sitting here in my favorite armchair, the one with the springs that have known me for decades, and on the small table beside me is an old wooden box. It's nothing fancy, just a simple cedar chest, its scent of earth and time faint but persistent. It's been my keeper of secrets, my silent confidant, for more years than I can easily count. I hadn't intended to open it today. My plan was to simply watch the rain, to listen to the house settle into its afternoon quiet. But my hand, as if with a mind of its own, reached out and lifted the heavy lid. And there it was, not a single object, but a lifetime scattered in pieces. My map. Now, when I say map, I don't mean a crisp, folded piece of paper with latitudes and longitudes. Oh no, this map is far more complex, far more real. It's a jumble of seemingly disconnected things. A photograph, curled at the edges, of a young man with too much hair and a terribly hopeful, terribly naive smile. That's me, of course. Or rather, theme that was. Looking at him, I feel a strange sense of distance, a gentle affection, as if I'm greeting a dear friend I haven't seen in ages. Hello, son. Long time no see. How have you been? It's a silly question to ask a photograph, I know, but the sentiment is real. I wonder what he would think of the man he became. Beside the photo is a train ticket. The ink faded to a ghostly blue for a one-way journey to a city whose name once sounded like a promise of everything. There's a pressed flower, a daisy, its petals as fragile as a moth's wing, a memento from a first love that felt as eternal as the stars and proved as fleeting as a summer storm. There's a small, tarnished brass key to an apartment I can barely picture anymore, yet I can still feel the precise way it fit into the lock, the satisfying click that meant I was home, safe, on my own. Each of these objects, you see, is a landmark, a pin pushed into the sprawling, invisible cartography of my life. This box doesn't hold things, it holds places. Not places on a globe, but places in the heart, in the soul. The harbor of childhood, the city of firsts, the mountains of adversity, the quiet lake of forgiveness. It's the map of my own journey. It's a strange thing, looking back. We spend the first half of our lives drawing this map, often frantically, sometimes without even looking where we're going. We spill ink, we tear the paper, we erase lines and draw new ones. We think we're heading north, only to find we've been traveling east all along. We follow roads that lead to dead ends and stumble upon hidden paths that take us to the most breathtaking vistas. Then one day, you find yourself on a quiet, rainy afternoon with more of the map behind you than ahead, and you get the urge to unfold it, not to judge the journey, not to mourn the wrong turns or wish for different paths, but simply to see it, to trace the lines with a weathered finger and understand how that boy in the photograph became the man sitting in this chair. How every twist, every storm, every sun-drenched valley was a necessary part of the whole. It's not a map of perfection. It's stained with coffee from late-night worries and teardrops from unspoken griefs. But it's also dotted with the bright ink of laughter and scribbled with notes of unexpected joy in the margins. It is, for better or worse, mine. And today, I feel like sharing it. I feel like unfolding it completely and starting from the very first mark, the very beginning of the journey. So, if you'll stay with me, let's travel back together. Let's see how far we've come. Every map must have a starting point, a place marked "You are here," before the journey even begins. For me, that place is what I call childhood's harbor. It wasn't a literal harbor with ships and salty air, though the name feels right. It was a small, landlocked town nestled in a valley, a place so secure and contained, it felt like the whole world was held safely in a gentle, green palm. My map begins there, not with a bold line, but with a soft, smudged fingerprint of memory. The lines of the streets in that town are etched into me. I can still walk them in my mind, feel the uneven crack in the pavement in front of Mrs. Gable's house, the one you had to hop over to avoid twisting an ankle. I can smell the heady perfume of the lilac bushes that grew wild along the fence of the old church, their scent thick and sweet on a warm May evening. These sensory details are the coordinates of my origin. The heart of that harbor was our house. A small, white house with green shutters and a porch swing that groaned a familiar, comforting song. The cartographer of that world was my mother. Her domain was the kitchen, a place of warmth and impossible magic. The map of my childhood smells of her baking bread, a scent that meant safety, sustenance, and unconditional love. It smells of the cinnamon and cloves she used in her apple pies, a scent that still, to this day, signals a celebration. She moved through that kitchen with an economy of motion that was a dance, her hands always busy, always creating. She taught me that love wasn't always a grand declaration. Sometimes it was a warm meal on a cold day, a mended tear in a favorite shirt, a steady presence that was the anchor of our little world. Her lessons weren't spoken, they were lived. They were the foundational lines upon which all other roads on my map would be drawn. My father was the quiet cartographer. He was a man of few words, his hands calloused and strong from his work. His presence was a different kind of landmark. It was the weight of his hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture that could convey pride, comfort, or gentle correction all at once. I remember sitting with him on that porch swing in the evenings, the sky turning a deep, bruised purple. We wouldn't say much. He'd just point out the constellations as they appeared, one by one. The Big Dipper, Orion, Cassiopeia. He gave me the stars. He taught me that there was a vast, unknowable world beyond our little valley, a map far larger than I could ever conceive. He never told me I had to go and see it, but he planted the seed of wonder. He showed me that the edges of our known world were not the end of everything, but merely the beginning. His quiet wisdom was the compass, the tool I would later use to navigate when I felt lost. In that harbor, my dreams were the first tentative lines drawn in pencil, easily erased and redrawn. I wanted to be a fireman, an astronaut, a detective who solved mysteries in the woods behind our house. The world was a place of infinite possibility, because it was also a place of absolute safety. Failure was a scraped knee that would be cleaned and bandaged. Heartbreak was a friend moving to the next town over, a sadness that felt immense but was soothed with ice cream. The borders of my world were the edge of town, and the greatest danger was being late for dinner. It was a sheltered existence, a necessary one. A harbor is, by its nature, a place to protect ships from the open sea. It is a place to be built, to be strengthened, to be prepared before one is ready to face the unpredictable winds and waves. Looking back at the map, I see that harbor not as a cage that held me back, but as the shipyard where I was carefully, lovingly built. It's where my keel was laid, my sails were stitched, my moral compass was installed. It was the calm, safe water where I first learned to float before I ever considered setting sail into the great, unknown ocean that lay beyond the horizon. There comes a time in every harbor when a ship, no matter how safe and comfortable it is, feels the pull of the tide. It's a restlessness, a yearning for the horizon that my father had pointed out on all those quiet evenings. For me, that pull became an undeniable force in my late teens. The pencil lines of childhood dreams began to be inked in, becoming firmer, more resolute. The world beyond the valley was no longer a vague, starry mystery. It was a destination. This next section of my map I call setting sail. And like any departure, it was a tumultuous mix of exhilarating excitement and heart-gripping terror. The decision itself felt less like a choice and more like a biological imperative, like a migratory bird feeling the turn of the seasons in its very bones. The town that had once felt like a protective embrace now began to feel like a comfortable cage. The familiar streets, the faces I had known my entire life, the predictable rhythms of small-town life. They started to feel limiting. I was filled with the naivety of youth, a potent, intoxicating cocktail of arrogance and ignorance. I believed I knew everything I needed to know, and I was convinced that my destiny was a grand, shining city just waiting for my arrival. I looked at the adults around me, my parents and their friends, and I saw their contentment as a form of surrender. I didn't understand it then. The deep, quiet courage it takes to build a life in one place, to tend to your roots. I only saw the need to fly. The physical act of leaving is what I remember most vividly. The packing of the suitcase. It was an old brown leather case of my father's, and filling it felt like a sacred ritual. What do you take with you when you leave the only home you've ever known? I packed clothes, of course, chosen with an absurd belief that they would define the new person I was about to become. I packed a few treasured books, their spines cracked, their pages filled with worlds that had fueled my desire to find my own. But the most important things I packed were invisible. I packed my mother's belief in my goodness, a fragile shield against the cynicism I would inevitably encounter. I packed my father's quiet integrity, a compass that I hoped would keep me true. And I packed the hopes of my younger self, a heavy, buoyant cargo of dreams that felt both indestructible and terrifyingly fragile. I was setting sail with a hold full of abstract, unproven treasures. The farewells were the hardest part. They are a smudged, tear-stained section of the map. Saying goodbye to my friends was full of bravado and promises to write, promises that we all knew would be difficult to keep as our paths diverged. But saying goodbye to my parents on the train platform, that was a moment of profound, painful clarity. For the first time, I saw them not as the immovable, all-powerful figures of my childhood, but as two people who loved me more than I could comprehend and who were letting go of the most precious thing in their world. My mother fussed with my collar, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed a small bag of her homemade cookies into my hand. Her hug was fierce, a desperate attempt to convey a lifetime of love and warnings in a single embrace. My father, true to form, was quieter. He shook my hand, his grip firm, and then pulled me in for a brief, solid hug. "Be good," he said, his voice thick with unspoken emotion. "And call your mother." In that moment, the full weight of what I was doing settled upon me. I wasn't just going on an adventure, I was leaving a void. I was sailing away, and they were the lighthouse keepers, staying on the shore, their light guiding me out into the dark, open water. As the train pulled away, I watched them shrink on the platform, waving until they were just a speck. And I, the brave adventurer, the boy who couldn't wait to leave, cried silently for the first 100 miles. The train rattled on for what felt like an eternity, carrying me away from the familiar green valley and into a world that grew progressively flatter, grayer, and more immense. Every mile was a stitch pulling me further from the fabric of my old life. When I finally arrived, stepping off the train and into the roaring, sprawling metropolis, it was like stepping onto a different planet. This new, chaotic landscape on my map is the city of firsts, and it was an overwhelming assault on the senses. The air tasted different, thick with exhaust and the smells of a million different lives being lived in close proximity. Roasted nuts from a street vendor, stale perfume, damp concrete. The noise was a physical presence, a constant cacophony of sirens, shouting, roaring traffic, and a dozen different languages I didn't understand. It was nothing like the gentle hum of my hometown. This was a place that didn't care if you were there or not. It was magnificent and utterly terrifying. My first apartment was not the charming, sun-drenched loft I had imagined from movies. It was a tiny, fifth-floor walk-up in a grimy building, a room so small you could almost touch all four walls at once. The window looked out onto a brick wall, and the pipes shuddered and groaned like a dying beast whenever a neighbor used the water. But it was mine. That tarnished brass key I still keep in my cedar box unlocked the door to my own small universe. The first night I remember sitting on the bare floor. My furniture hadn't arrived yet, eating a sandwich from a nearby deli. The sheer, crushing loneliness of that moment was a physical weight. Back home, the evenings were filled with the sounds of my family. Here, the only sounds were the anonymous noises of the city and the frantic beating of my own heart. It was the first time I truly understood the difference between being alone and being lonely. That night, I learned that independence, the thing I had craved so desperately, had a sharp, bitter taste to it. Then came the litany of other firsts, each one a new and significant landmark. My first real job interview, for which I wore my one good suit, feeling like a child playing dress-up. I didn't get that job, or the next one. The city was a harsh teacher, and its first lesson was humility. I eventually found work as a clerk in a dusty bookstore, a job that didn't pay much but offered a quiet refuge from the city's relentless energy. It was there I had my first taste of true urban anonymity. I was no longer the son of so-and-so, or the boy who lived in the White House with green shutters. I was just a face in the crowd, one among millions. There was a strange freedom in that, but also a profound sense of being untethered. A ship without an anchor in a vast, indifferent sea. Navigating the city itself was a daily lesson in survival. Learning the labyrinthine subway system figuring out which neighborhoods were safe after dark, discovering the one small grocery store that sold bread that tasted even remotely like my mother's. Each small victory felt monumental. Each mistake, getting on the wrong train and ending up miles from home, getting shortchanged by a street vendor, trusting the wrong person, was a painful but necessary lesson. This city was not a gentle guide. It was a relentless instructor that demanded resilience. It stripped away my naivety, layer by layer. The boy who had left home convinced he knew everything was being unmade and remade every single day. He was learning that the world was infinitely more complex, more dangerous, and more beautiful than he had ever imagined from the safety of his harbor. The city of firsts was a crucible. It was loud, dirty, lonely, and unforgiving, but it was also vibrant, full of art and music, and people from every corner of the earth. It was the place where I stopped being a child waiting for life to happen and started becoming an adult, painfully and clumsily forging a path on my own map, one uncertain footstep at a time. After the initial shock of the city began to fade, replaced by a grudging familiarity, a new and more pressing challenge emerged. It was the question of purpose. What was I actually doing here? I couldn't just be a face in the crowd forever. I needed a direction, a main road on this sprawling map that was more than just a series of random, meandering streets. This period of my life is marked on the map as the crossroads of vocation. And it was a place of deep confusion, frustration, and eventual, surprising clarity. The bookstore job was a pleasant enough way station, but I knew it wasn't my destination. It paid the rent on my tiny room, but it didn't feed the deeper hunger for meaning that had driven me from my hometown in the first place. My first attempts at finding a career were a series of false starts. I was drawn to grand romantic ideas. I thought about being a writer, spending late nights hunched over a typewriter, creating masterpieces. I tried it for a few months, fueled by cheap coffee and youthful ambition. The result was a stack of painfully melodramatic short stories and the stark realization that having the desire to write and having the discipline and talent for it were two very different things. The map showed a short, dead-end road there. Then I considered being an artist, inspired by the galleries and museums I would visit on my days off. I bought a sketch pad and some charcoals and spent hours trying to capture the city's soul on paper. My drawings were clumsy, lifeless. Another dead end. These failures were humbling. The city was teaching me its second big lesson. Passion is not enough. The world doesn't automatically make space for your dreams just because you have them. You have to build that space, and you need the right tools and the right materials to do it. Out of necessity, I took on a series of jobs that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with paying the bills. I worked as a night security guard in a cavernous, empty office building. My only companions, the humming fluorescent lights and the ghosts of the daytime workers. I delivered packages, crisscrossing the city on a bicycle in all weather, learning its geography in the most intimate way imaginable. I washed dishes in the steamy, chaotic kitchen of a restaurant, the clatter and shouts a world away from the quiet bookstore. These jobs were not glamorous. They were exhausting and often demoralizing. On the map, they looked like a tangled, messy scribble in the center of the city. But looking back, I see they were not detours. They were a crucial part of the education. They taught me about hard work. They taught me about the lives of people who were invisible to the world I had come from. They taught me resilience and gave me an appreciation for the simple dignity of a day's labor. Most importantly, they taught me what I didn't want. Each tedious, back-breaking job was a process of elimination, helping me to narrow down the infinite possibilities to something more manageable. It was during my time as a security guard in the dead of night, with nothing but my thoughts for company, that the clarity began to emerge. I had a lot of time to read. I started borrowing books from the office library. Not novels, but books on architecture, on city planning, on how these massive, complex organisms, like the city, were designed and built. I became fascinated by the interplay of structure and humanity, of concrete and community. I realized that my love for the city wasn't just about its energy, it was about its form, its bones. I was captivated by the idea of creating spaces where people could live, work, and connect. The vague artistic aspirations of my youth began to coalesce into a concrete, tangible goal. I didn't want to write about the world. I wanted to help build it. The next morning, I went to the public library and started researching night classes in drafting and architectural history. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It was a slow, quiet dawn. It was the discovery of a road on my map that felt, for the first time, like it was heading in the right direction. It was a path that would require years of hard work, but it was a path I could see. A path that felt solid under my feet. The crossroads were behind me, and for the first time since leaving home, I had a true destination in sight. As I began to walk down this new road of vocation, pursuing my studies in architecture, I realized that a map is not just a collection of places and roads. It is also defined by the people you meet along the way, the fellow travelers who walk with you for a while. These connections are like rivers. Some are small streams that accompany you for a short distance, while others are great flowing waterways that fundamentally alter the landscape of your journey. This part of my map is crisscrossed by these beautiful, life-giving currents, and I call it the River of Friendship. In the lonely anonymity of the city, finding these connections was like finding an oasis in a desert. My first true friend in the city was a man named Leo, whom I met in a night class for drafting. He was older than me by a decade, a wiry, energetic man with a booming laugh that was entirely too loud for a library. While I was quiet and introspective, Leo was boisterous and unapologetically optimistic. He had come to the city from a different country, with a different set of dreams, but we found common ground in our shared status as outsiders, trying to build a life from scratch. He saw my seriousness and taught me how to laugh at my own mistakes. I saw his occasional recklessness and offered him a measure of stability. We were an unlikely pair, but our friendship was forged in the crucible of late-night study sessions, fueled by stale coffee and a shared determination to succeed. Leo was the one who dragged me out of my tiny apartment to explore the city's hidden corners, the little jazz clubs, the ethnic food markets, the parks I never knew existed. He taught me that the city wasn't just a challenge to be overcome, but a feast to be savored. His friendship was a vibrant, sparkling tributary that brought color and life to my monochrome existence. Then there were the roommates, a constantly shifting cast of characters who shared my living space over the years. We lived in a succession of cramped, slightly dilapidated apartments, our lives overlapping in the shared kitchen and the single bathroom. There was Sarah, a musician who would fill the apartment with the mournful sound of her cello in the evenings, her music a beautiful, melancholic soundtrack to our lives. There was Ben, a medical student who seemed to subsist entirely on caffeine and anxiety, his textbooks piled in precarious stacks in every corner. We were not always close friends in the traditional sense, but we were a tribe. We were a makeshift family, bound by shared poverty and the common goal of surviving in a demanding city. We lent each other money when paychecks were late, offered a shoulder to cry on after a bad day, and celebrated small victories with cheap beer and pizza. These people were fellow ships in the same harbor, offering safety and camaraderie in the storm of early adulthood. They were temporary, yes. Eventually, our paths all led in different directions, but the mark they left on my map is indelible. As time went on, the river of friendship grew wider and deeper. There were mentors at my first architectural firm, older architects who saw a spark of talent in me and took the time to teach me, to guide me, to challenge my ideas. They taught me that a career is not just about personal success, but about contributing to a craft, about passing on knowledge to the next generation. Their guidance shaped the kind of professional I would become. Their wisdom, a steadying current that kept me on course. But just as rivers change course, so do friendships. One of the most painful lessons of this period was learning that some connections are not meant to last forever. People move away, priorities shift, misunderstandings happen. I learned the quiet heartbreak of a friendship drifting apart, the slow, silent fading of a once vibrant connection. It's a part of the journey that no one prepares you for. Each goodbye, whether sudden or gradual, was a small amputation, leaving a scar on the map. It taught me to cherish the connections I had, to not take for granted the presence of good people in my life. The rivers of friendship taught me that a journey is not measured solely by the distance you travel, but by the lives you touch, and the lives that touch you in return. Without them, my map would be a barren and desolate landscape. Just as I was finding my footing professionally and building a network of friends, a new and entirely unforeseen landmark appeared on my map. It wasn't a place I had planned to visit or a road I had intended to take. It appeared suddenly, like a mysterious island rising from the sea, beautiful and disorienting and utterly captivating. This was the island of first love. Her name was Eleanor, and she worked at a small art gallery down the street from the architectural firm where I had just started as a junior draftsman. I used to walk past the gallery every day, and I would see her through the large plate glass window, arranging paintings or talking to patrons. She had a way of moving, a grace and a quiet confidence that I found mesmerizing. For weeks, I was too intimidated to go inside. I, who was learning to design grand buildings, could not summon the courage to walk through a simple glass door. When I finally did, it was on the pretext of asking about a painting. I don't even remember what the painting was. I only remember the sound of her voice, which was low and thoughtful, and the way her eyes, a deep shade of green, seemed to see right through my carefully constructed composure. We talked for an hour that first day about art and architecture, about the city, about the feeling of being small in big place. It was effortless. It was as if we were picking up a conversation we had started a long time ago. That conversation continued over coffee, then dinner, then long walks through the city parks as autumn turned the leaves to gold and flame. With Eleanor, the city, which had so often felt like an adversary, transformed into a magical backdrop for our story. The roaring traffic became a symphony. The towering buildings were no longer intimidating, but romantic, and my tiny, cramped apartment felt like a cozy sanctuary when she was in it. Falling in love for the first time is a complete redrawing of the map. It's like discovering a new primary color. Suddenly, the entire landscape is seen in a different light. Every experience is heightened. A simple meal becomes a feast. A walk in the rain is a grand adventure. My carefully planned future, my 5-year plans and career goals suddenly seemed secondary. The most important coordinate in my universe was her. It was an intoxicating, all-consuming experience. I learned about vulnerability in a way I never had before. To love someone like that is to hand them the map to your own heart, to show them all your secret places, your hidden fears, your fragile dreams. It is an act of supreme trust, and for a time, it felt like the safest, most wonderful thing in the world. But islands, especially the enchanting, mysterious ones, can also be treacherous. Our love was passionate and intense, but it was also built on the shaky foundations of youth. We were two incomplete people trying to make a whole, each of us looking to the other to fix the parts of ourselves that were broken. I placed my happiness in her hands, and she placed hers in mine, a burden far too heavy for either of us to carry. The same intensity that made our love so beautiful also made it volatile. Our disagreements were like sudden violent squalls, our reconciliations like the exhausted, tearful calm that follows a storm. I learned that love is not just about the beautiful vistas. It's also about navigating the rocky shores and the hidden reefs. After 2 years, our island paradise began to feel more like a beautiful, lonely prison. The end came not with a single dramatic shipwreck, but with a slow, painful drifting apart. The conversations that were once effortless became strained. The comfortable silences became heavy with unspoken resentments. We were two ships passing in the night, no longer heading for the same destination. The breakup was a devastation unlike any I had ever known. It felt like a part of my map had been violently ripped away, leaving a jagged, empty space. The city, once our romantic playground, became a landscape of painful memories. Every street corner, every park bench, every cafe held a ghost. The island of first love taught me the soaring heights of human connection, but it also taught me about heartbreak, about the profound, aching geography of loss. It was a beautiful, painful, and absolutely necessary part of the journey. The pain of that first heartbreak was a sharp, personal grief. But soon after, the map of my life would be altered by a different, more profound kind of loss, one that was not about a future that failed to materialize, but about a past that was suddenly and irrevocably gone. I call this chapter The Storm of Loss. It began with a phone call in the middle of a workday. It was my mother, her voice strained and thin, a sound I had never heard before. My father had had a heart attack. He was gone. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. Gone? How could he be gone? He was the quiet, steady landmark of my life, the North Star on my personal map. The idea that his light had been extinguished was incomprehensible. It felt like a fundamental law of physics had been broken. The journey home was a blur. The same train tracks that had carried me away toward my future with such excitement now carried me back into a world shattered by grief. When I arrived, the familiar green valley of my childhood seemed muted, the colors washed out. The white house with the green shutters looked smaller, more fragile. Inside, the comforting scent of my mother's baking was replaced by the funereal smell of lilies. Seeing my mother was the hardest part. She seemed to have aged a decade in a day, the vibrant center of our family now a hollowed-out echo of herself. In that moment, our roles reversed. I was no longer the child seeking comfort. I was the man who had to provide it. It was a sudden, unwelcome transition into a new stage of adulthood. The days that followed were a surreal procession of condolences, casseroles brought by neighbors, and hushed conversations. I went through the motions, helping with arrangements, greeting relatives, shaking hands, but I felt disconnected, as if I were watching a play about someone else's life. My grief wasn't a loud, crashing wave. It was a deep, silent undertow, pulling me down into a cold, dark place. I kept expecting to see my father walk through the door, to hear his quiet footsteps on the stairs, to find him on the porch swing, watching the stars. The silence he left behind was a deafening roar. It was in the small things that his absence was most acute. The empty armchair by the fireplace, his worn-out work boots by the back door, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table. These were the craters left by his departure, constant, painful reminders of the life that was no longer there. Navigating this storm was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Heartbreak had been a personal wound, but this was a seismic event that had fractured the very foundation of my world. It felt as though a huge section of my map had been submerged, washed away by a tidal wave of sorrow. The past was no longer a safe, nostalgic place to visit. It was now tinged with the pain of absence. For a long time, I was lost in that storm. My work suffered. My friendships felt distant. There was a fog of grief that clouded everything. I learned that grief is not a linear process with clear stages. It is a chaotic, unpredictable weather system. Some days the sun would break through, and I would feel a moment of peace, even joy, remembering a happy moment with my father. The next day, a random memory or a familiar scent would trigger a sudden squall of tears, leaving me wrecked and exhausted. The journey through this period was not about progress, not about moving forward. It was simply about survival. It was about learning to stand in the wind and the rain and not be washed away. It was about accepting that the map of my life would forever have this tear, this water-stained, damaged section. It would never be perfectly whole again. And in that acceptance, strangely, was the first glimmer of healing. The storm taught me that we are shaped as much by our losses as by our triumphs. It carved new depths into my soul, and from those depths, a new, more sober, and more compassionate understanding of life began to grow. After the disorienting storms of heartbreak and grief, there came a period of searching for solid ground. The map of my life felt tattered and unreliable. The fast-paced, transient nature of the city, which had once been so exciting, now felt draining. The constant change, the anonymity, the lack of deep roots, it all contributed to a sense of being adrift. I craved stability. I yearned for an anchor point, a place to moor my life against the unpredictable tides. This next significant phase of my journey is marked building a home. And it's not just about a physical structure, but about the slow, deliberate work of creating a sanctuary and a life with another person. It was during this time that I met Sarah. It happened not with the sudden, dramatic discovery of an enchanted island, but with the quiet, gradual recognition of a safe harbor. We worked for the same large architectural firm. She was a landscape architect, someone who designed the green spaces around the buildings I helped create. For a long time, we were just colleagues, our interactions limited to professional meetings and polite greetings in the hallway. I admired her work. She had a gift for creating spaces that felt both beautiful and peaceful, little pockets of nature in the midst of the city's concrete jungle. She herself was like one of her gardens, calm, thoughtful, and possessing a quiet strength. Our friendship grew slowly, built on a foundation of shared professional respect and a similar outlook on life. We would have long conversations over lunch, talking not just about blueprints and zoning laws, but about our families, our pasts, our hopes for the future. With her, there was none of the dizzying, volatile intensity of my first love. Instead, there was a sense of ease, of coming home. It was a gentle, warming light, not a blinding flash. Our decision to build a life together felt like the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't a leap of faith into the unknown, but a conscious, deliberate choice made by two people who had seen enough of life's storms to value a sturdy shelter. We decided to get married, a decision that felt less like a grand romantic gesture and more like a mutual agreement to be each other's anchor. We bought our first home, a small fixer-upper, in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The house was a mess. It had peeling paint, leaky faucets, and floors that creaked with every step. But it had good bones, as we architects like to say, and it was ours. The process of renovating that house became a metaphor for the life we were building together. We spent our weekends covered in sawdust and paint, tearing down old walls and putting up new ones. We learned to compromise on paint colors, on kitchen layouts, on whose turn it was to deal with the ancient, temperamental furnace. We had arguments fueled by exhaustion and frustration, but we always found our way back to each other. We were learning the craft of partnership, which, like architecture, requires patience, a solid plan, and the willingness to adjust when things don't go as expected. Slowly, that run-down house transformed into a home. Sarah planted a garden in the backyard, and for the first time since leaving my childhood valley, I had a patch of green earth to call my own. We filled the rooms with second-hand furniture, with books, with music, with the smells of our cooking. We hosted dinner parties for our friends, our home filled with laughter and conversation. This was a different kind of happiness than the thrilling highs of my youth. It was a quieter, deeper contentment. It was the joy of a shared routine, of knowing there is someone who will be there at the end of a long day, of building something lasting and real, board by board, brick by brick. This section of my map is not marked by a single dramatic point of interest. Instead, it's a detailed, lovingly drawn-out area filled with the small, significant landmarks of a shared life. It is the anchor point, the place from which all future journeys would begin, and to which they would always return. It was the steady center I had been searching for all along, just when Sarah and I had settled into the comfortable, predictable rhythm of our life together. The map was redrawn once again, this time with the addition of a whole new, unexplored continent. This vast and transformative territory is called the Valley of Parenthood. The arrival of our first child, a son, was a seismic event that shifted the entire topography of our existence. We had read the books, we had taken the classes, we had prepared the nursery. We thought we were ready. But nothing can truly prepare you for the moment they place that tiny, fragile, impossibly perfect human being in your arms. In that instant, your own life, your own ambitions, your own needs are no longer at the center of your universe. The compass of your heart is permanently reoriented to point toward this new life. The first few years of parenthood were a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and a love so fierce it was terrifying. It was a journey into a deep, beautiful, and utterly exhausting valley. Our well-ordered home became a chaotic landscape of toys and baby gear. Our quiet evenings were replaced by feeding schedules and bedtime stories. Our intellectual conversations about architecture and art were supplanted by intense debates about the merits of different brands of baby food. My professional ambitions, which had been the driving force of my life for so long, were suddenly put into a new perspective. A successful presentation at work paled in comparison to the triumph of coaxing a smile from my son, or watching him take his first wobbly steps. Life became smaller in scope, but infinitely deeper in meaning. One of the most profound shifts was seeing the world through a child's eyes again. I had spent years learning to see the world as an adult, to analyze it, to deconstruct it, to build upon it. My son taught me to see it with wonder again. A simple walk around the block became a grand expedition to discover interesting rocks, fascinating insects, and the magical patterns of cracks in the sidewalk. A rainy day wasn't an inconvenience. It was an opportunity to splash in puddles. He reminded me of a sense of pure, unadulterated joy that I had long forgotten. He re-enchanted the world for me. I began to see my own work differently. I was no longer just designing buildings. I was designing the future environments where children like my son would grow up, play, and learn. Parenthood gave my work a new and profound sense of purpose. Of course, the valley was not without its shadows. There was the constant gnawing anxiety that comes with being responsible for another human being's well-being. Every cough, every fall, every fever was a source of panic. There was the strain it put on my relationship with Sarah. We were no longer just partners. We were co-parents, a team navigating the logistics of a complex 24/7 operation. We were often tired, stressed, and short-tempered with each other. We had to learn a new way of communicating, of carving out small moments for ourselves amidst the beautiful chaos. It was a test of our foundation, and there were times when I feared it might crack under the pressure. But we learned to lean on each other, to find humor in the messes, and to remember the couple we were before we became parents. Our love changed. It became less about romance and more about a deep, resilient partnership forged in the shared trenches of raising a child. 2 years later, our daughter was born, adding another new dimension to our family and our map. The experience of being a guide for these two small travelers, of drawing the first lines on their own maps, was the most challenging and rewarding work of my life. It was a constant process of teaching and learning. I taught them how to ride a bike, how to read, how to be kind. They taught me about patience, about unconditional love, and about my own capacity for joy and worry. The Valley of Parenthood was a place of immense growth. It was where I truly learned the meaning of selflessness, of responsibility, and of a love that is not about possession, but about nurturing another's journey. It was the most beautiful, demanding, and transformative landscape I had ever traveled through. After navigating the beautiful, chaotic, and all-consuming Valley of Parenthood for a number of years, our family journey entered a new phase. The map smoothed out. The frantic, hand-drawn lines of early parenthood gave way to a broader, more established highway. This period I call the plateau of midlife. It was a time of relative stability, of routine, and of a hard-won, quiet contentment. The children were in school, their lives filled with friends, homework, and activities. My career had progressed steadily. I was a senior architect at my firm, respected for my experience, managing my own projects. Sarah's landscape architecture business was thriving. We had moved into a larger house in a good school district. The fixer-upper of our youth, a fond memory. We had achieved many of the things we had set out to do. On the surface, it was the picture of success. The days fell into a predictable, comfortable rhythm. The morning rush to get the kids to school, the workday, the evening ritual of dinner, homework, and family time, the weekends filled with soccer games and piano recitals. It was a good life, a busy life, a life full of the small, ordinary joys that make up the substance of our existence. There was a deep satisfaction in seeing the things we had built, our family, our careers, our home, flourish. The frantic survival mode of the early years had been replaced by a sense of mastery. We knew what we were doing, or at least we were good at pretending we did. The storms had passed, and we were sailing on a calm, wide sea under a clear sky. But plateaus, for all their stability, can also be deceptively dangerous. When you walk on flat ground for a long time, you can forget what it feels like to climb. And in the midst of all this contentment, a strange and unsettling question began to creep into the quiet moments of my day. Usually on the commute home or late at night after everyone else was asleep. The question was simple, but terrifying. Is this it? Was this comfortable, predictable, stable life the final destination? Had I finished drawing the most interesting parts of my map? I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything I had, but it was coupled with a nagging feeling of flatness. The fire of youthful ambition had cooled to a steady, manageable ember. The thrill of discovery had been replaced by the comfort of familiarity. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who was successful, responsible, and a little bit bored. This wasn't the cliched midlife crisis of buying a sports car or having an affair. It was a quieter, more internal crisis. It was a crisis of meaning. I had spent 2 decades building this life, and now that I had it, I felt a strange sense of disillusionment. I began to question the path I was on. Was the career I had chosen with such certainty all those years ago still fulfilling? Or had it just become a habit? Was I truly present in my life, or was I just going through the motions, following a script I had written for myself long ago? I felt a powerful sense of nostalgia for the young man I had been, and the one who had arrived in the city, with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and a heart full of terror and excitement. He had taken risks. He had been willing to fail. The man I was now felt safe, cocooned in the comfortable life he had built. And he was suffocating. This period of quiet questioning was a crucial turning point. It was a recognition that a map is not a static document. It needs to be revisited, revised, and sometimes even radically redrawn. The plateau of midlife was not a destination. It was a vantage point. It was a place from which I could look back at the road I had traveled and, more importantly, look ahead to the undrawn territories and decide which direction to go next. The comfort of the plateau had become a siren song, luring me into a premature contentment. But the old yearning for the horizon, the one my father had instilled in me so long ago, began to stir again. It was time for a course correction. It was time to start climbing again. The quiet discontent of the midlife plateau eventually grew into a need for decisive action. Continuing on the same well-paved highway felt like a slow spiritual death. I needed to find a new path, to feel the thrill and terror of the unknown once more. This led me to a critical juncture, a place on the map I call the fork in the road. It represented a monumental decision to leave my stable, successful, and prestigious career as a senior architect at a major firm and start my own small independent practice. It was a choice that seemed to many people around me completely insane. On one side of the fork was the road I knew. It was a superhighway, smooth, direct, and predictable. It offered financial security, a clear path for advancement, a pension, and the respect of my peers. It was the sensible, responsible choice, especially for a man with a mortgage and 2 children approaching their college years. My colleagues couldn't understand why I would want to leave. "You've made it," they'd say. "Why throw it all away?" Even Sarah, my anchor, was initially apprehensive. She supported me, as she always did, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We had built our life on the foundation of that stability, and I was proposing to take a sledgehammer to it. On the other side of the fork was a narrow, unpaved track heading into a dense, uncharted forest. This was the path of starting my own firm. It offered no guarantees. The financial risk was enormous. The probability of failure was high. It meant giving up a corner office for a desk in our spare bedroom. It meant trading a team of draftsmen and assistants for doing everything myself, from designing buildings to making the coffee and answering the phone. It was a path of immense uncertainty, hard work, and potential humiliation. And yet, it was the only path that felt alive. It was the only path that called to my soul. What was driving me? It was a deep-seated need for autonomy and creative freedom. In the large corporate firm, I had become more of a manager than an architect. My days were filled with meetings, budget reviews, and paperwork. I was overseeing other people's designs, not creating my own. The joy of the craft, the simple pleasure of putting pencil to paper and solving a design problem had been lost. I longed to get back to the core of why I had fallen in love with architecture in the first place, the desire to create meaningful spaces on a human scale. I wanted to work on smaller projects, a home for a family, a community garden, a small library, projects where I could have a direct relationship with the people I was building for. I wanted my work to feel personal again, not corporate. Making the decision was agonizing. I spent months weighing the pros and cons, creating spreadsheets, having long, difficult conversations with Sarah. The fear of failure was a constant, heavy presence. What if I couldn't get any clients? What if we lost the house? What if I was making a catastrophic mistake that would harm my family? The judgment of others was also a factor. In our society, to willingly step off the ladder of success is seen as a kind of failure in itself. It was a battle between my ego, which craved the security and prestige of my job, and my spirit, which craved authenticity and purpose. In the end, it was a conversation with my son, then a teenager, that tipped the scales. He was struggling with what he wanted to do with his life, and I was giving him the standard fatherly advice. Follow your passion, do what you love. He looked at me and said, "But Dad, do you love your job?" The question was so simple, so direct, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow. I couldn't honestly say that I did, not anymore, and I realized that the greatest lesson I could teach my children was not through my words, but through my actions. I had to show them what it meant to take a risk for something you believe in. The next day, I handed in my resignation. I had chosen the unpaved track. I stepped off the highway and into the woods, my heart filled with a terrifying, exhilarating mix of fear and freedom. The map was mine to draw again. The early years of my new practice were a challenging, humbling, and ultimately rewarding climb. But as the business slowly found its footing, another opportunity to expand the map presented itself. With the children growing more independent, Sarah and I realized we had more freedom than we'd had in 2 decades. We had always talked about traveling, about seeing the world beyond our own shores, but it had always been a distant, someday dream. Now, someday had arrived. This new chapter is not a single location, but a series of vibrant, colorful new continents added to the map, a section I call the uncharted territories of travel. Our first major trip was to Italy. I had studied the great works of Roman and Renaissance architecture in books my whole life, but to stand in the Pantheon and look up at the Oculus, to walk through the ruins of the Forum, to witness Michelangelo's David in person, it was a profoundly humbling experience. It connected me to the long, deep history of my craft in a way that no book ever could. It was like a pilgrimage. But travel turned out to be so much more than just a professional education. It was an education in humanity. We purposefully avoided the large tour groups, choosing instead to stay in small, family-run inns, to eat in local trattorias, to get lost in the labyrinthine backstreets of ancient cities. We learned a few clumsy phrases of Italian and discovered the incredible power of a simple, genuine smile to bridge the language barrier. We met people whose lives were so different from our own, yet who shared the same fundamental hopes, fears, and loves. It was a powerful lesson in our shared humanity. That trip ignited a passion in us. Over the next several years, we made travel a priority. Each journey was a deliberate step into the unknown, a conscious decision to leave our comfortable routines behind and immerse ourselves in a different way of being. We traveled to Japan, where I was deeply moved by the serene beauty of the temples and gardens in Kyoto. The Japanese aesthetic of simplicity, of finding beauty in imperfection, of harmony with nature. It profoundly influenced my own design philosophy. It taught me the power of what is left out, the elegance of empty space. But again, the most lasting impressions were of the people, the incredible politeness, the deep respect for tradition, the quiet dignity we encountered everywhere we went. It was a lesson in grace. We journeyed to Peru and hiked a portion of the Inca Trail to Machu Picchu. The physical challenge of the high altitude and steep climbs was immense, pushing us to our limits. But to stand there at sunrise, watching the mist burn off to reveal the ancient mystical city clinging to the mountaintop was a spiritual experience. It was a stark reminder of the ingenuity of human beings and the immense power and beauty of the natural world. It made my own ambitions and worries feel very small, very insignificant in the grand scheme of things. It was a journey that recalibrated my perspective, that humbled me before the vastness of time and nature. These travels fundamentally broadened my map. For most of my life, my map had been a personal, internal one, focused on my own career, my own family, my own community. Travel exploded those boundaries. It overlaid my personal map with the grand, complex, and beautiful map of the world. It taught me that my way of life, my culture, my beliefs were just one of many valid ways of being. It replaced judgment with curiosity and fear of the unknown with a deep appreciation for the rich diversity of human experience. It made me a better architect, yes, but more importantly, it made me a better citizen of the world. It filled in the vast, empty spaces on my map with the faces, flavors, and stories of people from distant lands, reminding me that we are all connected, all part of the same sprawling, magnificent human family. The world was no longer a collection of abstract places on a globe. It was a network of real, living communities, and I felt a profound sense of connection to it. Life, I have learned, has a way of reminding you that you are never truly in control, no matter how carefully you draw your map. Just as I was enjoying the fruits of my risky career change and the enlightening perspectives gained from travel, the journey took a sudden, sharp, and unwelcome turn upward into a treacherous and unforgiving landscape. This part of the map is a steep, jagged range I call the Mountains of Adversity. It began not with a dramatic event, but with a quiet, persistent fatigue and a nagging cough I couldn't shake. I dismissed it as a lingering cold, the result of overwork and a busy schedule. I was a man in my late 50s, healthy and active. I didn't have time to be sick. But when Sarah finally convinced me to see a doctor, the diagnosis was not a simple virus. It was cancer. The word itself lands with the force of a physical blow. It sucks the air out of the room. It silences all other thoughts. In an instant, the future you have been so carefully planning dissolves into a terrifying, formless fog. My meticulously drawn map, with its projects and travel plans and dreams for retirement, was suddenly rendered meaningless. The only landmark on the horizon was this terrifying, monolithic mountain that I now had to climb, whether I wanted to or not. The path forward was no longer a matter of choice. It was a grueling, non-negotiable ascent through surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. The climb was arduous. There were days of such profound physical sickness and exhaustion that simply getting out of bed felt like summiting Everest. There was the loss of hair, the loss of appetite, the constant metallic taste in my mouth. My body, which had always been a reliable vessel for my journey, felt like it had been hijacked by a foreign invader and the toxic potions used to fight it. But the physical toll was, in many ways, secondary to the emotional and psychological struggle. There was the fear, a constant cold companion that whispered to me in the dead of night. Fear of the pain, fear of dependency, fear of leaving my family, fear of the ultimate unknown. There was the loss of identity. I was no longer an architect, a husband, a father. I was a patient, a diagnosis, a collection of symptoms and statistics. In these mountains, however, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. And more importantly, I discovered the profound, life-sustaining power of love and community. Sarah was my rock, my steadfast guide on the climb. She managed my appointments. She advocated for me with doctors. She held my hand during the long, draining hours of treatment. She sat with me in the dark when I was too scared to sleep. She was the embodiment of the vow, in sickness and in health. My children, now young adults, rallied around me with a maturity that filled me with awe and pride. They took turns driving me to the hospital, cooking meals, and simply being present, their love a powerful medicine. My friends, the ones from the old river of friendship, reappeared, refusing to let me climb alone. They brought food, they sent books. They called just to talk about normal, everyday things, which was a precious gift of normalcy in a life that had become anything but. This outpouring of love was a safety rope, a lifeline that kept me from falling into the abyss of despair. After a long and brutal year, I reached the summit. The cancer was in remission. The view from the top of that mountain was not one of triumphant victory. I was too weary for that. I was changed. I was scarred, physically and emotionally. The climb had taken its toll, but the view was one of breathtaking, painful clarity. It was the clarity that comes from having faced your own mortality. The petty worries, the ego-driven ambitions, the grudges, they'd all been burned away by the ordeal. All that was left was a profound, overwhelming gratitude for the simple, staggering gift of being alive. Gratitude for every sunrise, for the taste of a good cup of coffee, for the sound of my wife's laughter, for the warmth of the sun on my face. The mountains of adversity was the most difficult terrain I ever had to cross. It was a brutal, unforgiving climb, but it taught me the most important lesson of all, that every single day is a precious, unpromised gift. The map of my life was now etched with that truth, and the journey forward would be guided by its light. Having descended from the treacherous mountains of adversity, I entered a new phase of my journey. One defined not by action or ambition, but by a quiet, internal reordering of my emotional landscape. The confrontation with mortality had left me with a deep sense of gratitude, but it also left me with a desire to travel light, to shed any unnecessary baggage I was still carrying from the past. This led me to a serene and reflective place on my map, a place I call the quiet lake of forgiveness. It was here I realized that for decades I had been carrying heavy, invisible stones in my pack, old resentments, lingering regrets, and judgments against myself and others. It was time to put them down. One of the heaviest stones was a long-held grudge against a former business partner from the early days of my independent practice. He had betrayed my trust in a significant way, a professional wound that had festered for years. I had told myself I was justified in my anger. He had been wrong. But as I sat by the metaphorical shores of this quiet lake, I began to see that my anger was a poison I was drinking, hoping he would suffer. It was a heavy, useless weight that was only tiring me out. Forgiveness, I began to understand, was not about condoning his actions. It wasn't about saying what he did was okay. It was about releasing myself from the prison of my own bitterness. It was an act of self-preservation. I wrote him a letter, not an angry one, but a simple, direct one, stating that I was letting go of the anger and wished him well. I never sent it. The act of writing it was enough. I felt a palpable sense of release, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had unburdened myself, but forgiving others, I discovered, was the easy part. The far more difficult task was learning to forgive myself. My map, when I looked at it honestly, was filled with detours and mistakes I deeply regretted. I thought of the times I had been short-tempered with my children when they were young because I was stressed about work. I thought of the friendships I had let wither due to neglect. I thought of my first love, Eleanor, and the clumsy, selfish way I had handled the end of our relationship. I thought of my father and all the questions I never asked him. All the things I never said. These regrets were like ghosts that haunted the quiet corners of my mind. They were the crumpled, tear-stained parts of my map that I tried to avoid looking at. Learning self-forgiveness is a slow, gentle process. It's not about erasing the past or pretending the mistakes didn't happen. It's about accepting your own flawed humanity with compassion. It's about acknowledging that the young man who made those mistakes was doing the best he could with the knowledge and emotional tools he had at the time. I had to learn to look at that boy in the photograph, the one who left home with such naive certainty, not with judgment, but with the same gentle kindness I would offer to a dear friend. I had to forgive him for his arrogance, for his fears, for his failures. I had to accept that those missteps, those wrong turns, were not aberrations on the journey. They were the journey. They were the very experiences that had carved the lines of wisdom and empathy into my soul. They were the painful lessons that had eventually led me to a place of greater understanding. This process of forgiveness, both of others and of myself, was like slowly, carefully smoothing out the old, crumpled parts of the map. It didn't erase the stains or mend the tears, but it made the document whole again. It allowed me to look at the entire journey, the beautiful parts and the ugly parts, with a sense of peace and acceptance. The quiet lake of forgiveness was not a destination where I arrived and was suddenly healed. It is a place I have learned to return to, again and again. It's a practice. It's the daily work of letting go, of choosing compassion over judgment, of choosing peace over the turmoil of resentment. It is the art of traveling through the remainder of life with a lighter pack and a more open heart. Just as the landscape of my inner world was settling into a new kind of peace, the landscape of my home was about to undergo its most significant change since the children first arrived. One by one, our son and then our daughter, now grown and full of their own dreams, packed their own metaphorical suitcases and set off to draw their own maps. This period, which so many parents face with a mixture of pride and dread, is what I call the empty nest. It required us to find a new compass, to reorient ourselves in a world that had suddenly grown very quiet. I remember the day our daughter, the younger of the two, left for college. We had helped her move into her dorm room, a sterile cinder block box that she was already transforming with posters and photos. We hugged her goodbye at the door trying to keep our composure. The drive home with Sarah was silent. We didn't need to speak. We were both feeling the same profound sense of an era ending. When we walked back into the house, the silence was deafening. It was a physical presence. The house, which for 2 decades had been filled with the noise and energy of children, laughter, arguments, music, the constant running up and down the stairs, was suddenly still. Her bedroom door was open, the room achingly neat and empty. It felt like the heart had been taken out of our home. The first few months were a difficult adjustment. We had spent 20 years organizing our lives around the needs of our children. Our schedules, our meals, our conversations, our worries. Everything had revolved around them. Now, that organizing principle was gone. We found ourselves with an abundance of time and a strange lack of purpose. We would sit down to dinner, just the 2 of us, and struggle to find things to talk about that weren't related to the kids. It was as if we had forgotten how to be a couple without the buffer and the focus of our children. We had to rediscover each other, to find the man and woman who had existed before they were mom and dad. It was an awkward, sometimes clumsy dance, like learning to walk again after a long illness. But slowly, we began to adjust our compass. We started to see the empty nest not as a loss, but as an opportunity. It was a new kind of freedom. We could be spontaneous again. We could decide on a Friday evening to drive to the coast for the weekend. We could eat dinner at 9 p.m. if we wanted to. We could travel more freely without worrying about school schedules. We started to reinvest in our own relationship, taking the time for the long conversations we used to have when we were first dating. We reconnected over shared interests that had been dormant for years, visiting museums, going to concerts, taking long hikes. We were no longer just co-managers of the family enterprise. We were partners in adventure again. I also found a new rhythm in my work. Without the constant pull of family obligations, I could immerse myself more deeply in my architectural practice. But my motivation had changed. It was no longer about proving myself or building a financial safety net. It was about the pure joy of the craft. I began to take on more pro bono work, designing a small community center for a local nonprofit, helping a young family on a tight budget design an addition to their home. My work became less of a career and more of a calling, a way to give back. The empty nest also gave me something else, the gift of perspective. Seeing my children navigate their own early adulthood, making their own mistakes, celebrating their own triumphs, was like watching my own journey from a distance. I could offer advice when asked, but I had to learn to step back and let them draw their own maps, to find their own way through the city of firsts and the crossroads of vocation. It was a powerful lesson in letting go. The empty nest was initially a place of echoing silence and sadness, but it gradually transformed into a spacious landscape of new possibilities. A place where Sarah and I could draw a new chapter on our map together. With the newfound spaciousness in our lives that came with the empty nest and the profound perspective shift that followed my illness, I found myself drawn to pursuits that had little to do with career or responsibility. For so many years, my identity had been wrapped up in being an architect, a husband, and a father. Now, there was room for something more, or perhaps something simpler. This chapter of my map is not a grand continent or a dramatic mountain range. Instead, it's a collection of small, beautiful, and lovingly tended plots of land I call the gardens of hobbies and passions. It was here I discovered the deep, quiet joy of learning and creating for its own sake. My first garden was a literal one, inspired by Sarah's lifelong love of plants. I decided to take over a neglected corner of our backyard and build a vegetable garden. I knew nothing about gardening. My first attempts were a comedy of errors. I planted things too close together. I watered them too much or too little. I battled with pests and weeds that seemed to have a supernatural resilience. It was a humbling experience for a man who was used to designing complex structures that obeyed the laws of physics. The natural world, I quickly learned, operates on its own set of rules, and it demands patience, observation, and a certain surrender of control. But I persisted. I read books. I talked to neighbors. I learned from my mistakes. And slowly, miraculously, things began to grow. I'll never forget the thrill of pulling the first carrot from the earth, or the taste of the first sun-warmed tomato picked right off the vine. It was a simple, primal satisfaction. Working in the garden became a form of meditation. With my hands in the soil, I felt grounded, connected to the fundamental cycles of life, death, and renewal. It was a quiet, profound counterpoint to the intellectual, abstract work of architecture. My second garden was one of sound. On a whim, I bought an old second-hand acoustic guitar. I had always loved music, but I had never tried to make it myself. I found a local teacher, a patient young woman half my age, and began the slow, clumsy process of learning to play. My fingers, so adept at holding a pencil, were stiff and uncooperative on the fretboard. The sounds I produced were often discordant and painful to the ear. There were many times I was tempted to give up, frustrated by my lack of progress. But I kept at it, practicing for a short time every day. And eventually the fumbling gave way to chords, the chords strung together into songs. The first time I managed to play a simple folk song all the way through without a mistake. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. It wasn't about performing for anyone. It wasn't about achieving mastery. It was about the private, personal pleasure of creating a small piece of beauty in the world. Music became a new language for me, a way to express emotions that had no words. These pursuits and others that followed, a pottery class where I learned the messy, tactile joy of shaping clay. A renewed interest in birdwatching that turned my daily walks into treasure hunts were not about productivity or achievement. They were about play. They were about rediscovering the curiosity and wonder of a child. For so much of my adult life, my time had been a commodity, something to be managed, optimized, and converted into results. These hobbies reclaimed time as something to be simply inhabited and enjoyed. They were entirely for me. They were small acts of devotion to the parts of myself that had been neglected during the long, busy years of building a career and raising a family. These gardens did not produce wealth or fame. They produced something far more valuable, a sense of quiet contentment, a deeper connection to the world around me, and a richer, more vibrant inner life. They were the small, beautiful details that made the entire map come alive with color. Just as Sarah and I were settling into the quiet, contented rhythm of our later years, tending to our gardens of hobbies and passions, a new and wonderful landmark appeared on the map. It wasn't a territory we had to explore ourselves, but rather a new vantage point from which to see the entire journey in a new light. This remarkable place is the bridge of generations. It began with a phone call from our son, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that I recognized instantly. He and his wife were expecting a child. We were going to be grandparents. The news sent a ripple of pure, uncomplicated joy through our lives. It was different from the anxious, world-shifting joy of becoming a parent. This was joy without the immense weight of direct responsibility. We wouldn't be the ones responsible for the sleepless nights, the discipline, the college savings. Our job was simpler, and in some ways, more profound. We were to be the keepers of the story, the providers of unconditional love, the safe harbor for a new generation. When our first grandchild, a little girl named Lily, was born, holding her for the first time was a moment of deep, cyclical magic. I looked at her tiny, perfect face, and in her, I saw a reflection of my son as a baby, and in him, a reflection of the young man I once was. I saw the unbroken thread of life, stretching back through generations I had known and forward into a future I would never see. It was a powerful, humbling, and deeply comforting feeling. Becoming a grandparent fundamentally changes your relationship with time. Suddenly, the past, present, and future are no longer distinct entities. They collapse into a single, flowing river. When I would tell Lily's stories, I wasn't just passing the time. I was building a bridge. I would tell her about her grandfather, my father, the man who taught me to see the stars. I would tell her about the little white house with the green shutters, about the city I moved to when I was young, about the adventures her father had as a little boy. I was taking the raw material of my own life, the landmarks on my own map, and weaving them into the fabric of her emerging world. I was giving her roots. I was letting her know that she was not just an isolated individual, but the latest chapter in a long and ongoing story. In my role as a grandparent, I became the family historian, the living link between what was and what will be. Watching my son and his wife become parents was another profound experience. I saw my own struggles, my own fears, and my own joys mirrored in their journey. I watched them navigate the exhaustion and the overwhelming love of early parenthood, and my heart filled with a deep sense of empathy and pride. It was a chance to relive the best parts of parenthood without the intense pressure. I could get down on the floor and build block towers with Lily. I could push her on the swings until she shrieked with laughter. I could read her the same bedtime stories I had read to her father. And then, at the end of the day, I could hand her back to her parents and go home to a quiet, peaceful house. It was, I often joked, the best deal in the world. But beneath the joke was a serious truth. Being a grandparent is a role of pure love, a chance to connect with a child in a way that is unburdened by the daily grind of parenting. It is a relationship built on joy, stories, and shared wonder. 2 years later, our daughter had a son, and our world was filled with even more love and laughter. The bridge of generations was now a sturdy, well-traveled structure. Our home, once achingly quiet in its empty nest phase, was once again filled with the beautiful chaos of young children. But now, it was a chaos we could dip into and out of, a joy we could savor without being consumed by it. Being a grandparent was the ultimate reward of the long journey. It was the moment I realized that the purpose of drawing my own map was not just for my own navigation, but so that I could one day help guide the little travelers who came after me, pointing out the beautiful vistas and the safe harbors, and giving them the love and confidence to go and draw their own incredible maps. Now, in these later years, I find I spend a lot of my time in a quiet, reflective place. It's not a physical location, but a state of mind. A high perch from which I can look back over the entire sprawling landscape of my life. I call this place the Observatory of Wisdom. It's from here that I can finally see the whole map, not as a series of disconnected events, but as a single, coherent, and meaningful tapestry. It's here that I can finally begin to connect the dots, to understand the hidden logic and the strange, beautiful patterns of the journey. From this vantage point, I can see things that were invisible to me when I was in the thick of it. I can see how the painful experiences were often the most important catalysts for growth. The loneliness of my first years in the city, for example, taught me self-reliance. The heartbreak from my first love cracked my heart open and made me capable of a deeper, more mature love with Sarah. The terrifying climb through the mountains of adversity taught me a gratitude for life that I could have learned in no other way. When I was living through those moments, they felt like cruel, random punishments. But from the observatory, I can see that they were not detours. They were essential parts of the path. They were the pressure and heat that forged my character. They were the dark valleys I had to pass through to appreciate the sunlit peaks. Wisdom, I've learned, is not about avoiding suffering. It's about understanding its purpose. I can also see the intricate, invisible threads that connected seemingly random events. If I hadn't taken that tedious job as a night security guard, I might never have had the quiet time to read those books on architecture and discover my true calling. If my first business partnership hadn't ended in a painful betrayal, I might not have developed the resilience and caution that allowed my own practice to eventually succeed. If Sarah and I hadn't gone through the stressful, difficult process of renovating that first little house, we might not have built the strong foundation of partnership that saw us through the challenges of parenthood and illness. Life is not a straight line. It's a complex web of cause and effect, of choices and consequences, of luck and serendipity. From the observatory, I can see the beautiful, intricate pattern of that web, and I can feel a sense of awe at the mysterious way things unfold. This perspective has also brought me a deep sense of peace. When I was younger, I was always striving, always reaching for the next thing, the better job, the bigger house, the next achievement. I was constantly measuring my progress, worried that I wasn't getting far enough, fast enough. From the observatory, that relentless striving seems so unnecessary. I can see that the journey was never about reaching a particular destination. The journey asterisk was asterisk the destination. The purpose of life was not to arrive at some future point of happiness and success, but to fully inhabit every step of the path. The joyful, the painful, the boring, the terrifying. The wisdom of age, I think, is finally understanding that. It's the ability to look back at your own messy, imperfect, beautiful map and say, yes, that was my life, and it was good. It was enough. From this high place, I no longer see the boy in the photograph as a separate person. I see him in me. His naive hopes are the foundation of my contentment. His fears were the seeds of my courage. His mistakes were the tuition for my wisdom. We are one and the same, the beginning and the end of the same journey. And from the quiet of this observatory, I can look back at him across the decades, across the entire sprawling map, and I can finally answer his unspoken question. What would he think of the man he became? I hope he would be at peace. He would see that the journey was harder, stranger, and more wonderful than he ever could have imagined. And he would understand that he made it home. As I sit here in my observatory, tracing the lines of my life, I've begun to notice something else. Beyond the specific events and locations, there are recurring symbols and motifs that appear again and again, like a secret language embedded in the cartography. To truly understand the journey, I must learn to read this symbolic language. This final act of reflection is what I call reading the legend. Just like the key on the corner of a paper map that explains what the lines and colors mean. It's about understanding the personal mythology I have created over a lifetime. One of the most prominent symbols on my map is the idea of building. It's no surprise, I suppose, for an architect, but it goes deeper than my profession. My life has been a series of construction projects. I started by building a new identity for myself in the city. Then, Sarah and I literally built a home, renovating that first house. We went on to build a family, a partnership, and a life together. After my career crisis, I had to build a business from the ground up. And after my illness, I had to rebuild my body and my sense of self. It seems my fundamental impulse, my response to the chaos of the world, has always been to create structure, to make something solid and lasting. This symbol tells me that at my core, I am a maker, someone who finds meaning in the slow, deliberate process of bringing something new and useful into the world. Another recurring motif is the contrast between the harbor and the open sea. I began in the ultimate safe harbor of my childhood, and a huge part of my journey was about venturing into the unpredictable open waters. Yet, throughout my life, I have sought and created new harbors, the quiet refuge of the bookstore in my early city days, the anchor of my marriage to Sarah, the sanctuary of the home we built. But I also seem to have an innate need to set sail again, to leave the comfort of the harbor for the thrill of the unknown, leaving home, changing careers, traveling to foreign lands. My life has been a constant oscillation between these two poles, the deep human need for safety and belonging, and the equally powerful yearning for freedom and discovery. The map shows that a good life requires both. You need a safe harbor to return to, but you also need the courage to leave it and explore the horizon. Water, in its many forms, is another powerful symbol. There is the river of friendship, a life-sustaining force. There was the disorienting, all-encompassing ocean of first love. There was the violent, destructive storm of loss. And finally, there is the quiet lake of forgiveness. Water, for me, has always represented the emotional landscape. It is the realm of feelings, of connection, of grief, and of healing. Unlike the solid structures I build, water is fluid, ever-changing and powerful. My journey has been about learning to navigate these waters, to respect their power, to build sturdy ships, and to find the wisdom to be still and float when necessary. I have learned that one cannot control the emotional currents of life, but one can learn to be a better sailor. Reading the legend of my own map is a deeply personal process. Your symbols will be different from mine. Perhaps your life is a story of gardens, of planting seeds and nurturing growth. Or maybe it's a story of mountains, of constant climbing and seeking new heights. Or perhaps it's a story of music, of finding harmony and rhythm in the chaos. Whatever your symbols are, discovering them is a key to understanding the deeper themes and purposes of your existence. They are the secret code that unlocks the meaning of your journey. They transform a simple biography, a series of "and then this happened" events, into a rich, resonant, and personal myth. It is the story you have been telling yourself and the world your entire life. So, here we are, near the end of our shared journey through my past. The map is fully unfolded before us. Its every crease and stain examined, its every landmark revisited. The rain has stopped, and the late afternoon sun is breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the room. There is a sense of completion, of a story told. And with that comes the inevitable thought of what happens next. What do you do when you reach the edge of the map? This final chapter is about folding the map, but not putting it away. It's about living with the awareness of mortality, not as a source of fear, but as a source of peace and clarity. There was a time when the thought of my own end was a source of profound terror. It was the ultimate void, the final, frightening unknown. But after the climb in the mountains of adversity, my relationship with mortality changed. Having looked it in the eye, it lost some of its power over me. I came to see it not as a cruel thief coming to steal my life, but as a natural, inevitable, and even necessary part of the journey. A map is only meaningful because it has edges. A story is only compelling because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The finite nature of our time here is what gives every moment its preciousness. If we had forever, would we ever truly love? Would we ever strive to create something beautiful? Would we ever cherish a simple sunset? I don't think so. The end of the journey is what gives the journey its meaning. This acceptance is not a morbid preoccupation with death. On the contrary, it is a profound affirmation of life. Knowing that my time is limited makes me want to live the days I have left more fully, more gratefully. It strips away the non-essential. It makes me less tolerant of pettiness, of wasted time, of unkindness. It focuses my attention on what truly matters, my love for Sarah, and the joy I find in my children and grandchildren, the quiet satisfaction of my work and my hobbies, the simple beauty of the world around me. It is the ultimate filter for my choices. Is this worth a moment of my precious, finite life? This question brings a wonderful clarity. So I am folding the map. Not to hide it or forget it, but to hold it with a new kind of reverence. It is not a record of a finished trip that will be filed away and forgotten. It is a living document, a testament to a life lived. I can still take it out from time too in these quiet moments, to trace a favorite road or revisit a cherished view. It is a source of comfort, of gratitude, and of wisdom. It is my companion, but my focus is no longer on the past. The work of mapping is largely done. The work now is simply to be present, to live in the small, quiet patch of territory called now. The work is to savor the view from where I am, without yearning for past landscapes or worrying about what lies beyond the map's edge. I find a deep peace in this. The restless striving of my youth has been replaced by a quiet contentment. The fear of the unknown has been replaced by a gentle curiosity. I don't know what, if anything, comes after the journey is over. And for the first time in my life, I am okay with not knowing. It is the one territory that we are not meant to map. It is the final mystery. My role is not to solve it, but to live my life in such a way that when I do reach the edge of my map, I can let go with a sense of peace, knowing that I traveled well, that I loved deeply, and that I left a few good, sturdy structures behind me. The map is folded, held gently in my hands, and I am ready. And so, my friend, we have reached the end of my story, the edge of my particular map. Thank you for walking with me, for listening with such patience as I've retraced these old, familiar paths. Sharing the journey has given it a new life, a new meaning. But now, I want to turn the attention away from my old, weathered map and turn it towards yours, because every one of us has one. You are, at this very moment, drawing your own. This final part of our conversation is not a conclusion, but an invitation. An invitation for you to reflect on your own journey, on how far you have come. Perhaps you are just setting sail from your own childhood harbor, your suitcase filled with a similar mix of naive dreams and unspoken fears. The vast open sea of adulthood lies before you, and the map is almost entirely blank. To you, I say this: be brave. Do not be afraid to get lost. The most beautiful discoveries are often made when you wander off the planned route. Draw your lines with a bold hand, but don't be afraid to erase them and start again. And listen to the advice of the older travelers you meet, but always, always trust your own compass. Or maybe you are in your own city of firsts, feeling overwhelmed and lonely, wondering if you've made a terrible mistake. I see you. I remember that feeling so well. Know this: the disorientation is part of the process. You are being unmade and remade, and it is a painful but necessary transformation. Be kind to yourself. Celebrate the small victories, finding your way on the subway, making a first friend, cooking a decent meal in your tiny kitchen. These are not small things. They are the foundations you are laying for the rest of your life. Perhaps you're at a difficult crossroads, or climbing a steep mountain of adversity. The path ahead may seem impossible. You may feel that your map is torn beyond repair. To you, I offer this thought: the journey is not about avoiding the difficult terrain. It is about discovering the strength you possess to cross it. You are stronger than you think. Do not be ashamed to ask for help, to lean on your fellow travelers. They are your lifeline. And know that the view from the other side, the clarity and gratitude you will feel, will be worth the arduousness of the climb. Maybe you are on the comfortable plateau of midlife, and you feel that nagging sense of, is this it? Listen to that voice. It is the call of your own soul, urging you not to settle, not to fall asleep. It is not a sign of ingratitude. It is a sign that you are still alive, still growing. Have the courage to take a fork in the road, to choose the unpaved track. The purpose of a map is not to find the shortest, easiest route. It is to explore the fullness of the territory. Wherever you are on your journey, I invite you to take some time, perhaps on a quiet, rainy afternoon like this one, to unfold your own map. Look back at the person you once were. Greet them like an old friend. Long time no see. How have you been? See their hopes and their struggles not with judgment, but with compassion. Trace the path that has led you to where you are now. Acknowledge the storms you have weathered, the rivers you have crossed, the loves you have known, the losses you have mourned. See the beautiful, complex, and utterly unique tapestry of your own life. Your map is a masterpiece, a sacred document. It is the story of a soul navigating its way through the world. Cherish it, honor it, and then take a deep breath, pick up your pen, and have the courage to draw the next line. The journey is not over. The greatest adventures may still lie ahead.